So there's an article that was written by a establishment. I don't know what he is. I think he's a reporter, not journalist, reporter, whatever he is. But he's very anti-Trump. I'm sorry, obviously anti-Trump, but also anti-Bernie in many cases too. But he wrote an article for the New York Magazine? Yeah. So the name of the author is Jonathan Chait. I know him as Jonathan Chait. He has been in mainstream media for many times for a long time. Has gone on a lot of networks, MSNBC, CNN, all that stuff. So, but he did an article about the mainstream media, I guess, to a large extent, the mainstream media, and he covered how Donald Trump has a hatred for this specific reporter. Her name is Maggie Haberman. And Jonathan Chait is asking, why does the left hate Maggie Haberman? So the title of the piece is, of course, Trump hates Maggie Haberman. Why does the left? It says, last weekend, New York Times White House reporter Maggie Haberman wrote about the dilemma faced by former communications director Hope Hicks. Facing a subpoena to testify to the House, she wrote, Hicks must choose between ignoring the administration policy of stonewalling investigations and risking her standing with the president and his party, or facing, quote, legal jeopardy, end quote, from Congress. All hell broke loose, as it usually does when Haberman reports a story. In this case, the hell came from the left. Progressive objections to the piece centered on the neutral and arguably uncritical tone it adopted about a decision whether or not to comply with the law. Much of the criticism concerned the headline and the glamorous photo that accompanied it, neither of which is Haberman's responsibility, and the latter of which is a difficult pitfall to avoid when the story's subject came to her job via the modeling profession. Yeah, it's referring to an article from the New York Times. Yeah, that is a pretty nice picture. By the way, Hope Hicks is the former White House communications director. That's what the New York Times article is pointing out here. Continuing on with the Chait article, it says, the piece was not the best specimen of Haberman's work, but the response to it did illustrate the extraordinary and almost pathological hatred her name provokes. The text began with the story's decision premise. With the story's, quote, decision premise, and quickly spread to reviving claims that Haberman herself habitually regurgitates administration propaganda. Critics claimed that Haberman's mother, a public relations agent, compromises her ability to report independently, called her a monster, and so on. The left-wing HuffPost media critic Ashley Feinberg has included Haberman on both her list of cowards, courtiers, strivers, and suck-ups, and her list of thinnest skins in the media. Haberman can be hated both for her work and the fact that she disagrees with the hatred of her work, a wonderfully perpetual cycle of content generation. One of the oddities of the left's Haberman hatred is its failure to recognize identical levels of hatred on the right. Haberman has gotten under President Trump's skin like no other reporter. The difference is that the right's loathing for Haberman is rational. No reporter has pried the erratic dysfunctionality of Trump's management style more wide open than her. Haberman began producing searing depictions of Trump's temperamental unfitness during the campaign and continued churning out exposés of his legal travails, from his attempts to fire Robert Mueller to his use of phones that can be easily monitored by Russian or Chinese spies. Her byline alone does not capture the extent of reporting footprint. Haberman's coverage informs the paper's entire coverage of Trump. In the 5 days since her Hicks story appeared, 3 of which were a holiday weekend, Haberman's co-bylined or contributed reporting to 6 stories. The White House reporting beat, despite its prestige and superficial allure, is a difficult and grinding post. Haberman has not only exceeded any other reporter's coverage of Trump, she has probably covered Trump more thoroughly than any White House reporter has covered any president in history. There's a lot of fawning in this article, isn't there? Seems like Jonathan Chait is trying to promote Haberman as if she should win a fucking award or something here. Accordingly, Trump viscerally loathes Haberman, even as he craves her approval. When Haberman reported last year that Trump's fixer, Michael Cohen, was preparing to flip on his former patron, the president lashed out at her as a third-rate reporter named Maggie Haberman, known as a crooked H flunky, referring to Hillary, who I don't speak to and have nothing to do with. Trump has, in fact, given Haberman several interviews, nearly all of which have yielded a trove of damning quotes. When she helped report on what the Times called a secretive assault by Mr. Trump on the machinery of federal law enforcement this year, Trump raged against the paper as the true enemy of the people. It is a fallacy to say, as reporters sometimes do, that they must be doing something right if both sides are complaining. It is also fair to concede that some of Haberman's work merits some complaint, but the idea that she is on the whole a failure or an easy mark for the administration is preposterous, and the spreading conspiracy that her mother's professional needs have somehow forced Haberman to suck up to the administration overlooks the fact that the administration obviously despises her. If Haberman's mother's business required her daughter to stay in Trump's good graces, she would have been closed down years ago. The progressive loathing of Haberman draws some of its force from the mistaken belief that the straight news reporters should stand up to the president and call him out for his unfitness to hold office. Some people who believe this fail to grasp the distinction between news gathering and opinion journalism. Others believe Trump's unique authoritarianism and unfitness for office gives straight reporters a special duty to slip the shackles of objectivity. One thing they might consider as they direct this frustration against Haberman is that we know as much as we do about Trump's authoritarianism and fitness for office because of her reporting. So, basically, what Jonathan Chait is saying is that Maggie Haberman is a wonderful reporter. She's done wonderful things. She's exposed Trump. She covers him extensively, done interviews with him where she's called him out and gotten juicy quotes from him. And he claims that people were lashing out at her. I don't know if they did. I'll take his word for it. But apparently they were lashing out at her because she posted a very nice picture of this Hope Hicks person who's I think former communications director for Donald Trump. So yeah, I mean, I don't really see the point. I wouldn't really see the point in complaining about a picture in an article. I don't really care what picture anybody posts about at the top of an article. I mean, for the most part, that doesn't mean anything. Maybe, I don't know, she would have posted an uglier picture of that girl. I don't know. But that's fine. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what the picture says. Let me check this again. So, were they complaining about the art? Were they complaining about what she said in the article, or was it just about the picture? It says much of the criticism concerned the headline and the glamorous photograph that accompanied it. Oh, okay, so it's quoting a tweet from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which says, so she's, she's quoting the piece or something. It says, so she's quoting Soledad O'Brien, who's a mainstream reporter. It says this, so referring to the article from Hope Hicks, it says, this is a good example of bias in the New York Times. A picture of a person who is considering not complying with a subpoena is basically a glam shot, and it's framed as a thoughtful, perfectly equal choice. Oh ha, I didn't even realize who wrote it. Imagine having people write about your decision to answer a subpoena as an existential dilemma. The way these journalists treat the potential sources for the next book is not surprising. So I guess what Soledad O'Brien is referring to is getting access. So she's I think she seems to be making this suggestion here that Maggie Haberman is trying to look for access to Hope Hicks so that she could write like a book about her, or maybe a book about Trump, and then have access to quotes and statements from Hope Hicks. And then AOC responds to what Soledad O'Brien said and said, yup, where's the, quote, no angel take now? In the immediate aftermath of shootings, media routinely post menacing photos of people of color victims, plus dredge up any questionable thing they'd ever done. But when Hope Hicks considers not complying with a subpoena, it's glamour, shot time. If you're curious about how this behavior and its defensiveness should change, check this person's piece. And then she links to an article about when feminism is white supremacy in heels. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think generally it's true that, and I don't agree with a lot of the things, if not majority of the things that Soledad O'Brien says, who's just like a Bernie Sanders hater. Can't stand her. But a lot of it does have to do with access, but I mean, a large part of why Haberman is people, and this is not just a Haberman. This is the fact that, you know, the mainstream media in general is so despised that when these days, when even the smallest bit of, you know, let's say in this case they're saying she sucks up, I guess. They're saying that, so I don't know, AOC, I guess, to some extent, or, you know, who was Soledad O'Brien, sucking up to Hope Hicks in this case, or doing propaganda for the Trump administration, even though, and I believe her, or believe Jonathan Chait saying that she's criticized the Trump administration. I wouldn't be surprised because a lot of the mainstream media doesn't like Trump, but they also do a lot of its propaganda for him as well, especially when he's pushing for, you know, wars and shit, whether it's Venezuela, Iran, whatever. But yeah, but I can understand like the fact that, you know, you're calling this person out for wanting to possibly have access to this specific figure that's part of the Trump, and is or former part of the Trump administration, and then she wanted to, it says considering a person who is considering not complying with the subpoena. So she doesn't want to comply with the subpoena that's being given to her. So people start like, I don't know, in this case, I guess Maggie Haberman starts like fawning over Hope Hicks or whatever, I guess. So, I mean, that could be the possibility, but at the same time, it's like, listen, dude, I mean, the reason why people, like, so I guess the reason why people, whether it was the HuffPost critic, Ashley Feinberg, whether it's Soledad O'Brien, whether it's AOC, whether or not you agree or disagree with them, at the end of the day, the mainstream media, and again, I don't like Soledad O'Brien, I think she's horrible, but the larger picture of things is the fact that people just can't stand the media these days. The media is so bad. The mainstream media is just constantly doing the bidding of the establishment. They're constantly, you know, just sucking up to whatever the establishment wants, whatever the corporatists want, especially when it comes to Democratic corporatists, you know, the Democratic establishment. They're always sucking up to them, always pushing for everything they want to do, you know, whether it's being anti-Trump just for the case of being anti-Trump, not pushing any actual policies, smearing Bernie Sanders, as I showed you earlier in the past segments in this episode, as I've done in the past segments from other episodes. You know, this constant smearing of, you know, certain people that, you know, are smeared. It's clearly a pattern. So when Jonathan Chait is complaining about, oh my God, how dare you, you smear, you smear Maggie Haberman. Well, why is she being smeared? That's the question. She's being smeared for a reason. or whatever, if you want to call it smeared, or she's being attacked or being criticized, whatever, for a specific reason. It's not like we're just doing it, or people are just doing it because it's for fun, you know? It's because the media is sucky at what they do. And why shouldn't we assume that this reporter, in this case Maggie Haberman, is trying to gain access to Hope Hicks, or is trying to gain access to the Trump administration. So, when somebody gets called out for that, I mean, you can make the case that maybe that's a false charge, and that's unfair, and people shouldn't be making that charge unless it's actually true, like she's actually trying to do that. But when it comes down to it, a lot of times that's what reporters are doing. So if somebody like John Chait is complaining about that, don't blame us. Don't blame anybody. Don't really blame anybody for going after a reporter for possibly doing something that they could be doing, because it kind of fits that. It fits that that MO. It fits that modus operandi of what reporters do, where they do seem to push the narrative of what that administration wants to put out there, and then being sympathetic to this figure that doesn't want to comply with a subpoena, and all those kind of things. Whether or not she's maybe she's leaving because she doesn't like Trump anymore, referring to Hope Hicks. Maybe she's leaving the administration and not complying with the subpoena. Well, no, if she's not complying with the subpoena, that means she's doing what would benefit Trump, because it's regarding, I believe it's regarding Russiagate? Something like that. Yeah, it doesn't say. What's wrong with my congressional subpoena? Okay, it's just a congressional. Whatever the congressional subpoena is, it's probably going to be a detriment to Trump. Because she's going to go out there, and if she were to, comply with the subpoena, then she would have to say, she would have to basically go out there and defend Trump. And, or if not expose things about Trump, then maybe Trump doesn't want to be exposed. So, but, at the end of the day, it's really important to know that the reason why we, and I'm definitely speaking for myself, I'm speaking for progressives, and in many cases conservatives, of course, because they hate the mainstream media, but so do progressives, so do leftists, is we're calling out these reporters for doing the same thing they're always doing, which is worrying about access, which is worrying about pushing the narrative of the establishment, pushing the narrative of what the politicians want. In this case, being Trump, whether or not Maggie Haberman has gone after Trump before or not, it's kind of irrelevant. At the end of the day, we have to worry about what these reporters are going to do, and what their ulterior motives are going to be. So we have to keep them we have to take them to task and keep an eye out for them, and make sure they don't do the same things that they've always been doing. So if we call them out, we're calling them out just to keep them in check and make sure, like, hey, listen, you better not go and, use this, access that you have to Trump to go and push more of your fucking, bullshit propaganda, whether it's, whether or not it's in favor of Trump or against Trump, whatever it is, at the end of the, depending obviously what you're doing. So if, I don't know, if Maggie Haberman is doing some articles that are anti-Democrats, maybe some are, pro-Democrats, whatever it is, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, it doesn't matter though. At the end of the day, like, as long as you're doing good reporting, that's what's important, So if you're just pushing the constant Russiagate nonsense and, talking about, how, we have to overthrow the government of Venezuela and we have to, go to war with Iran and stuff, like, that's not good reporting. That's shitty reporting. But if you want to talk about, like, stuff regarding, like, the emoluments clause with Trump, as far as, violating those kinds of rules that are under the under the emoluments clause and whatnot in the Constitution, that's fine. Like, there are things that obviously, calling out Trump's corruption as far as money laundering and stuff, which is kind of involved in that whole emolument situation. So that's perfectly fine. So the reporting, it just depends. If these people would do better reporting like Julian Assange does, and like WikiLeaks does, and like Glenn Greenwald and all these great journalists do out there, then you're going to be, you're going to be given that credit, David Sirota and Benjamin Norton and excuse me, Max Blumenthal, Jeremy Scahill, like all these reporters. I mentioned them last week too. I have a lot of their books, up on my shelf over here. Barton Gellman, all these people. Like, these are all Charlie Savage. These people, they're all great reporters, and these are people that are focusing on real issues, not focusing on bullshit stuff that will help them, improve, get their careers, improve their careers, up their careers. They're worrying about what's going on in the country and what people should be focusing on. So I think that's important to call those people out and make sure to hold their feet to the fire and make sure they're doing their jobs right.